Dr. Nika Jones, and I'm here with my good friend, Dr. Krishan Finister. And I'm just going to be asking her some questions so you all can get to know her a little bit better.
All right.
All right. So, can you introduce yourself and just tell us a bit about your background in school psychology?
Sure. Okay. So again, I'm Dr. Krishan Finister, and I am dual licensed in the state of Texas as a licensed specialist in school psychology, meaning that I could do psychoeducational evaluations in the schools, as well as a licensed psychological associate independently practicing. So that means I'm licensed to provide clinical diagnoses outside the school.
Okay.
So I got my specialist level degree, which is basically a master's plus 30 hours from Texas Women's University to be a school psychologist. And I did my internship at Arlington Independent School District. And following that year, I began working at Fort Worth Independent School District, where I worked for 12 years. So I worked, a large urban school district for over a decade. During that time, I did take about a year off, and I went and I did school psychology work in Qatar in the Middle East. So hopefully I could tell our viewers about that another time. And when I came back home, I again worked to become an LPA, that licensed psychological associate. Finished up my time in Fort Worth Independent School District, and I began to do some an internship in private practice. And so now I am working both in private practice as well as in the public schools. So I split my time.
So, you're very busy.
I'm very busy.
All right. So, what inspired you to pursue this career?
I've always been a helper. So I knew that I wanted to help. I knew I liked education, but I didn't necessarily want to be in the classroom all day. I knew I wanted to do something supporting, and here I am, support staff. So I just knew that I liked psychology, like I like individuals, I liked brains. I actually thought I was going to be a psychiatrist, but I cannot do calculus. So psychology was definitely something that I was drawn to. I thought at one point I wanted to be a therapist, but my love for education and my love for psychology just kind of came together. So here I am, a school psychologist.
Awesome. All right. So, what led you to start traveling and working with different schools?
That's a great question. So as I started to pursue and looking at private practice options, I didn't want to leave the school. I always call it the schoolhouse. I didn't want to leave the schoolhouse. I didn't want to leave the school settings because that is my foundation. And I feel like it's just so important. It's not only just my foundation, but it's the foundation for our community, our society, is public schools. So I wanted a way to contract my work out to others because I know that there's just not enough school psychologists out there. So in addition to my private practice, I wanted to be able to serve the community still in school psychology. So I'm doing contract work.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like you make a good point, like there is such a shortage.
hmm
I mean, I get little messages on my phone daily about, hey, a school psychology job. So,
I know we just got one a
yeah.
few minutes ago. Both of our phones. Yeah, and I don't think people realize it takes 7 years to make a school psychologist. So, it's just not enough of us.
Yeah.
But the need is great.
It is, absolutely. All right. So, what are some of the most common misconceptions about special education services you've found?
Oh, there's a lot. But I think the biggest misconception is that we just put kids places. And special education is not a place. Special education is support services. And I understand the dark history, the unevolved history of special education services. But since 1975, when the public law was first implemented and now has evolved into Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, we call IDEA, since then it's definitely evolved. So special education is not a place, it's support services. And we just don't put kids places. There's a lot of procedures put in place, a lot of safeguards to protect the children as well as their families before we make any decisions.
All right. So, can you walk us through the process of how a student is identified for special education support?
Okay, so it's pretty lengthy, but I'll give a quick snapshot for for the viewers. So essentially, there's what they call multiple tiered systems of support. Okay, and that actually starts in general education. It used to be known as RTI, response to intervention. So if any child is having difficulties, and let's start with academics. Well, it's academic or behavioral, but academics is easiest to explain. So say a child is having difficulties with reading. First, the general education is responsible for giving interventions to that child. Interventions with fidelity, as well as interventions that are research-based to see how they could try to improve that child's reading ability. So maybe the general education instruction is not enough for them. So they need something more intense or to be taught a different way. Often we call it differentiated instruction. So differentiated instruction as well as interventions. And if a child is not responding after, say, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, then they move to even more intense instruction. And again, also intense interventions. And if the child is still not responding, then we have what we call a referral meeting. And it's the parents typically, it is evaluators such as myself, maybe a speech therapist, sometimes an administrator, and we talk about if the child is making progress or not. And if they haven't been making progress, then we move for referral. And that means we're referring this child to receive a special education evaluation for a full individual evaluation to see if they meet disability criteria to receive support services in the school setting.
Lengthy process.
It is. Sorry. It's hard to quick and dirty it, but I want people to kind of have a general idea what to expect.
Absolutely. All right. So, what role does a school psychologist play in the special education evaluation process?
Oftentimes a major one. So in a lot of cases, our main job is social emotional evaluation. So those looking at in the school setting, does a child meet criteria for an emotional disability and or do they meet disability criteria for autism? In my previous role, I also was responsible for the cognitive, so doing the IQ test to see where a child's intelligence is. I've also had to be responsible for looking at specific learning disabilities. Not so much now in my current role. My current role mostly focuses on those social emotional evaluations and occasionally the cognitive assessments.
All right. So, how do special education services differ from school to school or district to district?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, because in theory, they shouldn't. Because if you're under IDEA federally all over, the 50 states, it shouldn't. But I think it's really just figuring out the system in that school. Like that quick and dirty explanation I gave about the MTSS / used to be response to intervention process. Like who's responsible for it? Who's the one that contacts the parents? Who collects the data to track how a child is progressing or who implements those interventions? And then who notifies us as school psychologists or speech therapists that, hey, this child might be one we might need to refer. So I think the difference is who's responsible for what and how efficient they are at that role.
Okay. So it sounds like it's like a big team, like a lot of players.
Yes, there can be lots of players because you think about you have the general education teacher, you have the interventionists. Of course, you always want to include the parents. The administrators may have some thoughts on how to differentiate that child's instruction. So there's a lot of team members involved.
So what exactly is a psychoeducational evaluation and why is it important?
Great question. So the psychoeducational evaluation is just that. It's that evaluation that determines if a child meets disability criteria. And so again, you hear the word psycho, the psychologist, psychological part, as well as education. So how does the psychology of that child's learning impact them in the educational setting?
So what types of challenges or disabilities can be identified through these types of evaluations?
Okay, excellent. So the part that we did, I already talked about that, autism and ED, which is emotional disability. But under IDEA, there's actually, I believe, 14 criteria. So that can include visual impairment, orthopedic impairment. It can include speech and language impairment. Let's see here. I talk about auditory impairment. So those are just some of the few multiple disabilities that can be identified under IDEA and with one of those evaluations.
All right. And so what should parents and educators know before seeking an evaluation for a student?
I think the main thing is that an evaluation doesn't always mean an answer. Okay. So I know that through the evaluations, parents and educators can gain a lot of information about their child and how they're learning and maybe where their skill needs are. But sometimes I think educators and parents just put too much on that evaluation, and that evaluation is just one piece of it. So it's not the answer to everything, but it can give you a lot of good information. And hey, and even if you agree to an evaluation or as a parent, it doesn't guarantee that your child's going to qualify for services. And I think sometimes teachers don't understand that either. Like I know that ultimately a lot of teachers just want their students to be helped, but special education truly is not for help. It's for students who have a disabling condition. And those are differences.
Yeah, I think that is something that gets missed.
Yes.
So what are some of the biggest challenges you face when working with different schools?
Yeah, people know who I am. I think that's really hard as a traveler, as an itinerant, coming into a campus, like I need a room to be with this child alone. People are like, who are you? So really just like creating, because I don't want just rapport that with that student, I also want rapport with that campus. Like I want rapport with the office staff, because those are the people who can get me what I need, So I always try to be real respectful, real pleasant, because if they know who I am, they'll like, oh, let me move something around to get Dr. Finister a room. Or sometimes if I need to see the principal or the AP, then I'm like, okay, I know who you are. They know that I'm not there to play games. They understand what I'm doing. They'll make time, or they'll make it to get me on that person's schedule. So just letting people know who I am and kind of understanding the importance of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
So I'm sensing a theme here. It's like relationship building.
Yes, everything is rapport, rapport, rapport. Absolutely.
Can you share a success story where your work made a significant impact on a student?
You know what? I like to think that every time we do an evaluation and we gain information on students, it's helping them. But one stands out in my mind where a child was evaluated when they were 3. So, and 3 is 3 in the school setting, meaning that you don't have to wait to age 4 for pre-K or 5 to start kindergarten. If a child is identified with a disability, that means, hey, that child can get services immediately. And this one family stands out in my mind, and they were apprehensive, and understandably so. And their 3-year-old child who did meet criteria, I think we did NCEC, which I think is going away, but in the state of Texas. But at the time, non-categorical early childhood, meaning we weren't sure, but the child appeared to have a disabling condition. And long story short, the child came to school, and 3 years later, between the interventions, going to the early childhood special education program, getting the speech therapy, getting occupational therapy, when we did that 3-year reevaluation, we could no longer qualify that child. And I remember the mom and dad both just tearing up and crying and just saying how scared they were initially. And I just happened to follow this child through. It was just one of those situations. And they were just like, we were just really scared. They thanked us. And so the fact that they thanked us really, I think, made not only me feel good, but the whole team, that they thanked us, because they were like, hey, now we didn't necessarily understand everything you were saying, but we saw what it was doing in our child and the impact and the growth that we saw in our child. A child who at one point couldn't say, I love you, mommy, and now can say, I love you, mommy, and is talking and is looking at their peers and wanting to engage. And so I think anytime, even if people don't understand the jargon that we're speaking, but it makes them feel good and they can see the growth in their child, whether small or large, I think that's the impact for me.
Wow, that's amazing. And just imagine how many people probably have no idea that they can even start that early intervention.
Yep, absolutely. I know I see parents all the time. They're like, I wish I would have known. So yes, if you're listening to this, please, 3 is 3. Okay.
3 is 3. All right. And so what are some systemic barriers that prevent students from receiving the support they need? What have you seen?
I think that's a good segue from what you just asked. And I think one of the biggest barriers is just not knowing. I think not knowing, and sometimes I think in some communities it's just shame. There's still shame around the term disability, or shame around my child being developmentally delayed. And I just encourage people that there shouldn't be shame about that. If you need help, get the help, because the help is there. I just encourage people to ask the questions. Ask questions of your local school district. School districts are a huge resource. And I think just taking the time to ask the questions, even of your medical professionals, like I said, they work in the medical field, but they're still a good resource that could direct you back to the school setting. So
resources out there. All right. So how do you see the field of school psychology evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a great question. There's a lot going on right now, in the political climate, with the new presidential administration. For right now, all I can say is I just truly hope that all the work that's been done since 1975, when the public law was first initiated, that has developed into IDEA, I hope that work continues and grows. Again, when a child is identified with a disabling condition in a school setting, that is a protected class, and I want to continue to see those protections to stay in place.
For sure. All right. So what policy changes would you like to see in special education and psychological services?
That's a good question. I can say in the state of Texas, I wish that school psychologists were able to identify ADHD, so we do way more testing than even the physicians can. We do, 8 to 10 hours of testing versus a physician. Respectfully, you have children, you take them and they see your child for maybe 15 to 20 minutes. Yeah, and so that little checklist is not enough. So I feel as though we definitely have enough background and training for the school setting. And that's what we're doing. We're looking to see what the educational need is, that we should be able to identify ADHD at the schoolhouse.
Absolutely.
Wink, wink.
All right. So, what's one piece of advice you'd give to parents and teachers about supporting students with learning differences?
I definitely say that they don't have to do it alone. I've mentioned before, sometimes even parents in the community, sometimes even in the school setting, they don't realize the resources and supports that are there. Definitely ask other teachers. Even though you're gen ed, talk to the special education teacher. They may have a different way of processing things than you as a general education educator, and they could really provide you support and be a good person to consult with. So I just encourage educators to continue to have a teachable spirit. Even parents, I totally respect that you are your child's, you know them best. I would say even better than information that we gather. But I definitely encourage them to ask the questions. Ask the teachers, because the teachers you may have questions about resources and the teacher has that because the teacher didn't know that was a need, they don't give it to you. So I just encourage everybody to have a teachable spirit and ask those questions.
The community is definitely important.
Yes. Again, more rapport.
Yes, absolutely. So where can listeners learn more about your work or reach out for resources?
Absolutely. So you definitely can find me on the World Wide Web, Beyonce's web, Beyonce's internet. You can definitely find me at www.thetraveling.schoolpsych.com. Yes, go ahead, plug, yes, www.thetraveling.schoolpsych.com. You also catch me on Instagram at The Traveling School Psych. And you also can check me out if you have some private practice needs at www.yourjoypsych.com.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It was great getting to know you even better than I already know you.
Yes, and I just want to thank you so much for coming, Dr. Jones, today. Yes, I love you professionally and personally, and I literally could not be where I'm at today without you. You have supported me throughout graduate school. You supported me in marriage, supported me becoming a mother, supported me in these business endeavors, and I truly am thankful for you, and thank you for coming today.
Of course, feeling is so mutual.
Yeah.
So glad you came up to me in grad school and said we're going to be friends.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much.